Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dr. Sabri Saidam, the Deputy Secretary General of Fatah's Central Committee in Palestine in Ramallah, and Jalal Abukhater, a writer based in Jerusalem. And today we are talking about the situation in Gaza, how it's escalating, deteriorating every day. Gentlemen, welcome to ThePrint in India.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We're all very, very concerned about the situation in Gaza. So, Dr. Saidam, if I could start with asking you, you're a politician with the Fatah for many years, a former minister for IT, also an advisor, former advisor to the president, to the Palestinian president. In Gaza today, in Palestine, what is the situation?
It's good to be with you, and my heart is also going to our friends in India at the time of the turning point of the pandemic and its expansion throughout the world. One's heart aches looking at Gaza. The situation is so desperate. Israel is not giving in to the pressure of the international community. It is getting the blessing of the White House, and it's continuing with its aggression under the slogan of defending its own civilians, which is totally untrue. The root cause of the entire scene is the prolongation of the existing Israeli occupation. And the scene was set as Sheikh Jarrah and in Jerusalem, where Israel tried to evict Palestinians. And Sheikh Jarrah, by the way, symbolized a mini story of Palestine, where Israel is trying to replace Palestinians by evicting them from their homes using military aggression and military orders and so-called court orders and fake papers to throw people out of their territory. So what's happening in Gaza is that Israel is trying to move the ball game from being indicted for war crimes to indicting the Palestinians themselves by accusing them of launching rockets, by compromising the livelihood of the Israeli citizens inside Israel, which is totally untrue. You cannot deal with the results of the illness. You would have to deal with the root cause of the illness, which is the existence of the very occupation of Israel to Palestine.
Right. Jalal, you're a writer. You live in Jerusalem, which is the heart of the matter, shall we say. But over the last 24 hours, over the last 1 week, actually, since the crisis in Sheikh Jarrah, as Dr. Saidam just pointed out, the last 24 hours have been quite horrifying, images of buildings in Gaza as they've been sort of destroyed by Israeli rockets, houses, media houses in them, including Al Jazeera, AP, and various other media houses. We've seen how hundreds of people have been wounded. From the estimates that I have, about 900 wounded in Palestine and over 120 people killed, including several children. So tell me a little bit about the situation where you are.
The thing is about being in Jerusalem is we felt we were at the very center of something new, a new movement that was growing in Palestine. There was a unifying force that came out from Jerusalem and unified Palestinians across the territory, across Palestine, 48 Palestine and Gaza and the West Bank, even refugee Palestinians based in Jordan and Lebanon. What started in Jerusalem spilled over everywhere. Everyone is not okay with what happens in Jerusalem, of ethnic cleansing or desecrating of Al-Aqsa Mosque or taking people out of their homes, demolishing homes. That violence in Jerusalem that we endure all year long had finally, people said, we have to put a stop to this. Gaza and Palestinians elsewhere have protested. The form of protest that came from Gaza was like, you do not touch Jerusalem, you do not touch our whole sites and desecrate it. It was just a signal, but Israelis do not accept at all any form of protest from the Palestinians, and they respond with the most violent and the most extreme of violence against Palestinians. And that's what we're seeing in Gaza today. The Israelis are responding to Palestinian protests with huge aggression, targeting residential buildings, toppling and making people homeless by the dozens every night and killing families together in one home. The violent response by the Israelis to our protest, to our protest against their policies of apartheid, of ethnic cleansing, of colonialism in Palestine. Our protests are always met with violence, and unfortunately we're seeing the horrific images coming out from Gaza throughout the past week. just because we are protesting against Israeli aggression in the first place.
So, Dr. Saidam, two questions to you. The first is that elections were going to be held in Palestine on the 22nd of May after more than a decade. So how do you explain the timing of this latest conflict?
Would love to hear the second question, but I will go ahead and answer the first question.
Sure. The second question is about the US, and why do you think that the US is continuing to indiscriminately support the Israelis in the face of these images that are horrifying the world? But let me ask you the first question about the timing.
Sure. As you quite rightly put it, there was supposed to be elections on the 22nd of May. The Palestinian leadership had anticipated that Israel would stop the elections, looking at the events that preceded the decision to postpone elections. And it is evident now that if we went ahead with elections, Israel would not have allowed any electioneering to take part. It would not have allowed elections itself. The ballot boxes were to be placed, and the entire election process would not have been accepted by Israel.
But is it because you wanted to? Is it because you were the Israelis were not allowing elections in Jerusalem, and you insisted that no elections could take place if people in Jerusalem could not vote? Wasn't that the nub of the problem?
Well, this issue has been debated by the many Palestinian factions, but the truth of the matter is that there is a code of ethics that was signed in Cairo last March that emphasized the importance of the inclusion of Jerusalem being the capital of Palestine, and in total refusal of the decision of the previous American administration to announce Jerusalem as the entire capital of, an eternal rather, capital of Israel, Jewish Israel. And that was totally unacceptable. And for that reason, the Code of Ethics included Jerusalem, emphasized the importance of the fact that elections should take place in Jerusalem. And when election process started, it was clear that Israel was to ban the elections, but yet the Palestinian president issued a decree. In that decree, he had clearly stated that elections are to be held according to, and I quote the sentence, in Jerusalem and other Palestinian governorates. This is what it says in the decree, emphasizing the importance of Jerusalem. Now, when the process started going, there was a debate amongst different factions, and it's totally understood. Now, the evidence is there. What Israel has done over the course of the last few weeks was clear that it will not in any way would have allowed elections in Jerusalem. So it was a matter of principle, a point of emphasis, and also a fulfillment of a decision that was announced throughout the discussions with the different factions in Cairo and included in the Code of Ethics I mentioned.
Right. So I'll come to the US question a little bit later, Dr. Saidam. But Jalal, I want to ask you, you're a young person, you live in Jerusalem. I imagine you've been born here and you've been raised here. But the question is that in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu has lost the election. Of course, he continues to be prime minister because he is the outgoing prime minister. Now, do you believe, or do you think that as a young Palestinian living, cheek by jowl, that this is a vote against Netanyahu's right-wing policies, including the fact that he was so harsh and so aggressive towards Palestine?
But I would start to correct you at first. I don't think he lost the election. If the man of Netanyahu, the physical man, is not popular amongst certain politicians, but the ideology that he stands for, the right-wing ideology, the extremism that's we're seeing in Israel over the past 20 years, it was voted in to the Israeli government, overwhelmingly voted in. Major parties from extreme fringes of the right, extremists who usually would be chanting for the death of Arabs in the streets or supporting ideologies that incite against Palestinians the entire time. Those were the fringes which were one day called terrorists or labeled as terrorists by the Israelis or the American government. Today, those people are represented in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. And Netanyahu has brought those people in and normalized those ideologies. At the same time, many people against him are still extremely right-wing in the ideology. In how I see it, there is no left-wing in Israel, and the whole system, the whole electorate of Israel is leaning towards a direction that's just policies towards policies that are all against Palestinian existence, especially in Jerusalem and pro-annexation of like certain areas of the West Bank, maybe not all of it, but
yeah, but Dr.
it's
Saidam,
it's anti-Palestinian.
I need to explain to you is the fact that Netanyahu has been indicted many times by the security apparatus and was to refer to court. The only reason as to why he was not referred to court is the fact that he enjoys immunity as a prime minister. So Netanyahu not only fights for his political existence, he fights for his political future. He knows that the next day upon his departure, he will be indicted and he will be in court and he will be imprisoned and he will follow suit the other predecessors who came to office and then ended up in prison, such as Olmert and others.
right.
So his competition with the Palestinians is based on scoring on the Palestinians, play the role of a victim, getting more popularity in Israel, staying put in office. And you have to understand that this is not a democracy in any way. Although Israel tries to portray itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, it's totally unfounded because this is a country that is run by a single man. Sharon was the populist at the time in the past. Today, Netanyahu is the populist. And if you allow me just quickly to say that in Israel, it's considered that the left has left. There's no left anymore in Israel. And if there was any left, there is no popular left. There is no personality that governs the hearts of the Israelis as much as Netanyahu. Why? Because Netanyahu has really allowed the supremacy of the so-called the security file. So he scares Israelis to death and he comes out as the savior. The rockets coming out of Gaza really expressing the entire anguish of the Palestinian people and apathy with the international community's failure to come to the rescue of the Palestinians. Yes, but they come also to for Netanyahu as an opportunity to portray himself as the man with the formidable force wanting to save Israelis. Now he is caught in the middle because the war had started. He found out that Palestinians in 1948 have joined. The Palestinians in the West Bank have joined. Jerusalem is an unsettled file. And people from beyond Palestine, as you noticed in the last few days, people on the borders from Jordan and Lebanon are coming in and there is protest worldwide. So Netanyahu had only to celebrate 25 countries yesterday out of 194. Said, 25, as if, that's a big number, trying to protest trying to show support for Israel. He is a loser and he will be a loser, no doubt.
Okay, but Jalal, I want to ask you about the Hamas. I mean, there are reports, of course, that the Fatah, to which Dr. Saidam belongs, and the Hamas don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. The Fatah is a democratically elected party. And I'm not talking about the various factions within Palestine, the various political factions. But the Hamas, which, senior military leaders of the Hamas have been killed in the last few days by Israeli rockets. Do you feel as a young Palestinian that the Hamas is actually undermining your own position as a Palestinian?
I wouldn't say that. As a Jerusalemite based in Jerusalem and seeing what we've been going through in Jerusalem, all I'm seeing is a legitimate right to resist. That's like fighting against Israeli aggression.
You feel the Hamas has a legitimate right to resist?
No, Palestinians have the right to defend themselves. Palestinians have the right to resist.
Yeah, but I'm asking about the Hamas. How do you...
Hamas is part of the resistance factions, just like there are factions from Fatah, from PFLP, different parties. They're all engaged in resistance against Israeli aggression, for our rights to return, for example. You
would equate the Hamas with Fatah. Hamas is a military terrorist organization. The Fatah is not. It's a democratically elected party.
There is a concept of Palestinian resistance factions, and there are many different labels that have been thrown around by different parties, usually foreign powers like the United States or Europe, based on certain acts. As a Palestinian, I wouldn't use the term terrorist group to describe people who are represented politically or are part of my society. I wouldn't use such terms at all. I would use that term against those who terrorize me, myself, and my family, for example. I would use that against the police forces who raid homes in Jerusalem, just like this morning in Silwan. Silwan is where I'm from. And the terrorism from the state is much more violent and extreme. And when people don't talk about that kind of Israeli terrorism and focus on how Palestinians resist this aggression. That's my problem, when people do not focus on the actual aggression that's occurring against us.
Right. Dr. Saidam, doesn't this concern you? I mean, I'm an outsider, but to me it seems that the Fatah, which is a political party, which has been, you fought your own struggles. And the fact is that Hamas, which is a militant group, is now being equated by young men like Jalal. And he's saying that he's putting you on the same platform.
Well, let me just say, as to who was the party that called Hamas a terrorist organization. Yes, we don't see eye to eye with Hamas on many things, but I personally was in Gaza a few days before the attack, and I was part of a Fatah mission to prepare for elections. We have come to a consensus to hold elections. They are part and parcel of the fabric of the political scene in Palestine. The categorization of Palestinian factions as this is terrorist and that one is democratic is totally unfounded, because Netanyahu
Hamas is undermining you, Dr. Saddam. The Hamas undermining
we will still come to consensus in different matters, and as we are under fire, my vote will be for unity. It is time to unite and not to throw blames or point fingers. Hamas is part and parcel of the political factions. Palestinians have voted for Hamas 2006, gave them the majority on the Palestinian Legislative Council. We have gone to places with Hamas. Yes, we don't see eye to eye. We disagree with their strategy, but we adopt what we call popular unarmed resistance. They adopt the armed resistance. There's a difference in the principles, but those principles in every way and every meaning of the term of resistance do insist on the fact that we are under occupation. We are fighting against this occupation. We would want to be free, and we would like to establish a Palestinian state. These are the principles that really govern the connection between Hamas and Fatah and unite us over the will and the wish of the Palestinian people to end occupation. Now, who says that Hamas is a terrorist organization? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So Israel says that Hamas is a terrorist organization without mentioning that Netanyahu himself is the biggest terrorist on earth. He is killing children. I have the names of the kids I can share with you. 3-year-old this morning was buried under rubble as part of a 17-member family that were killed. The grandfather, the parents, the grandparents, the grandchildren, 17, 3-year-old, 15 years old. These are innocent civilians that are being buried under the rubbles of Gaza. So whoever fights against occupation is my brother, but whoever fights against occupation, being brothers, does not mean that we differ, does not mean that we don't have the right to differ. We differ on principles, but we agree on the liberation of Palestine, no doubt.
Right. Jalal, I want to ask you a more fundamental question. And, you live in Jerusalem, and I don't even know whether you were born or perhaps you were very small when the Oslo Accords were signed in the early 90s. But this idea of sharing Jerusalem, I'm not talking right now about what the Israelis are saying. They don't want to share Jerusalem very clearly. But you as a Palestinian who's been born and brought up there, can you conceive of the idea of sharing Jerusalem with the Israelis, where people can come and go, and sort of live together?
As of course, Jerusalem has been at the center of my political awareness or my understanding of the situation in Palestine. Jerusalem has always been at the very core of this whole thing. Growing up, I saw two Jerusalems. Of course, there's the Jewish Jerusalem. Even there's no east-west. My dad would tell me this is where the east and west sides were split in the past. This is where the borders were, and there would be a no man's land here. Today, I wouldn't be able to recognize that feature because the Israelis have done their best to make sure it looks like a unified city, even though deep down it's not. It's two different cities where there's a Palestinian Jerusalem, there is poverty, there is crime, there is lack of infrastructure, there is lack of permits to build, and the neighborhoods are really, really underdeveloped compared to the other side, Jewish Jerusalem. To live together, this is what's happening today. We are already living in one Jerusalem, governed by one state. At the same time, we know that we are not afforded the same rights. We're not afforded the same way of living that they have. We are always living and anxiously worried about losing our right to live in Jerusalem because our status is a resident. We are not citizens of Israel or Palestine or Jordan or anything. We are just stateless people who live in Jerusalem, and they just kept us there. So if we ever choose to live elsewhere, we lose our right to live there. There is a targeted campaign against us to make sure that our city is empty from all these Palestinians. And we're not afforded any rights like Israeli citizens are. And we have no guarantees that our livelihood in Jerusalem can continue. There is a struggle that we just want to stay. We want to remain in the city before we can think of any kind of solution or anything. We just want to remain steadfast and resilient in the city and not be kicked out before any solution comes up.
Right. Dr. Sabram, I want to ask you about, you talked about the Hamas and how your brothers, but it is the Hamas which is also firing rockets into Israel. I mean, in Lod, for example, earlier in the week, or in Acre and in other towns, people have been killed. And actually, this is not just Israelis being killed, but Arab-Israeli mixed neighborhoods are being affected. So are you not concerned that, this eye for an eye business that, of course, this has been going on for decades in your part of the world, but in this particular round of this conflict, that things could get exacerbated and perhaps beyond control?
Absolutely, and I care for the life of a human being regardless of their religion. I am not advocating the killing of anybody. I don't believe in bloodshed. If anything, I believe in words rather than bullets, and in dialogue rather than any armed killing of any innocent civilians. What I want to say is that in the Arab-Israeli context, you should really handle the illness rather than the results of that illness. The existing illness is the prolongation of the existing occupation.
I understand that, but in this particular
you cannot come and say and blame the victim for its actions if this existing problem is still prolonged. What needs to be done, what needs to be ended is occupation, and what needs to be ended further is the tenure of the right-wing government of Israel that is dwelling on the fact that it is a victim. You need to dwell on the fact that we are two people living on this land. We should draw into the decisions of the international community and dwell on that and build on peace and promote coexistence. What's happening is that, even we have a Jerusalemites who tells you, I don't exist on the map. I don't have an Israeli ID. I don't have an Israeli passport. I am stateless on my own land, on my own territory. This is racism. So you have racism, you have a military occupation, you have the blessing of some members of the international community for the prolongation of occupation, and then you come and blame the Palestinians. You cannot blame the victim for what's happening. But having said what I said, yes. I'm not in any way supportive of any killing of innocent civilians. I'm not in any way supportive of any bombing anywhere in the world, let alone Palestine. What needs to be done is this part of the world, Israel would have to be treated in accordance with the international law and should not be given any supremacy over any countries. Why would you apply the law and the international UN resolutions to Iraq, to Afghanistan? When it comes to Israel, no, this is a no-no, and you have to abide by the will of the Zionist lobbyists elsewhere. We need to focus on end of occupation. We need to promote coexistence, and we need to look into the scene with some eye of attention and care that the existence and prolongation of the right-wing government is not going to throw the Palestinians into the sea, and it's not going to eliminate the Palestinian identity. And over the years, we have not turned into the Red Indians of this land. We are the indigenous population of this land, and we will continue to be, and we will fight for our rights. And there was a famous saying, and with that I would end. I know, leaving a microphone for a politician is a disaster. They never stop me. Keep going. Right. You have to stop me. What I want to say is there's a famous saying in the Arab-Israeli conflict that the Israelis used to promote, that the elderly would die, the young would forget. I think, my kids know where they're going more than others who are considered to be aged politicians in the
Yes,
entire conflict.
Sure, I do want to have, I do have one last question to the two of you, and Jalal, if you can take that first. This is about the role of the international community. How do young people like you look at how the Americans are behaving, Europe and India?
It's not okay. It's very mixed feelings towards this. On the ground, we see a massive support for Palestinian rights. People coming out to protesting in major cities across Europe, the Americas, elsewhere in the world. We see those images even from India, from Pakistan, from Southeast Asia. We see images, popular support for Palestinian rights. At the same time, we know that over the past, let's say, 10 years, there has been a really major shift against Palestinian rights. And in a way, a lot of powers are just not really willing to take any steps to stop Israeli aggression. And I've written my master's thesis just last year on what was the European response, as an EU, what was their response towards the unilateralism of Donald Trump and his administration. It was very disappointing conclusion in my paper, just to find out that there was so much possible, so much that they could have done that wasn't done, because Israel has, I would say, they're not willing to confront Israel on many issues that they should, of course, concerning rights, concerning laws, international laws, international humanitarian law. They're not willing to confront Israel, and that is the problem. When the states, like a major power like the states or European powers, or even India, is cozying up to Israel with Modi, that is not good for Palestinian rights or the maintaining of the legal system that is governing our world right now.
Dr. Saidam, the same question to you. Are you disappointed that Joe Biden, the new president, is continuing in a way Trump's policy? And I also want to hear, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to say that I wanted to give Joe Biden the benefit of the doubt. I knew that there was so much mess for him to clear. He was focusing on his internal agenda, and the only emphasis he had for an external agenda was on Iran and trying to negotiate a new deal with Iran.
That's right.
We Palestinians have treated, his early comments with positiveness. I would have to say, he had said clearly that he believes in two-state solution. He believes in no unilateral acts ought to be taken to change the status quo. He believes that Jerusalem is an issue that was never settled. And he believes that he should support the Palestinian people financially. For good factors, but I would say deeds, not words. This is what's expected from Palestinians, from the Americans rather, by the Palestinians. And the only test, the first test he was put to was the existing war on the Palestinian people, starting from Sheikh Jarrah to Gaza. His position on Sheikh Jarrah is quite good, but I fear, and I have no evidence to that, I fear, and that will be cleared, by the way, in the coming few days, that the American administration, with the mess it is in, it was caught with the situation that it needs to please the Jewish lobbyists back in the White House, but also wanting to please the Palestinians as well by living up to its promises and the campaign rhetoric that existed throughout Biden's fight for the office of for the Oval Office rather.
Sure. And
so the big test is if you allow me, the big test is the war. And he had sent his envoy, and the envoy spoke the right rhetoric, but it's all taking time. And my biggest fear is that the American administration is speaking two different languages. One to the Israelis, because Netanyahu was thanking Biden for the support of the attack on Gaza. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we're told that Biden wants a cessation of hostilities. The two don't see eye to eye. The two don't equate. So we need to have a unified message from the American administration, and we need deeds, guys. We need actions. We cannot hear just words of condemnation while kids are dying, while infrastructure is being destroyed, while Gazans and Palestinians at large continue to suffer.
Right, and my last question to you on India. How do you think, India has not been very active in these last several years, but let me also point out that when Arafat was alive, in fact, he encouraged India in 1992 to open a formal diplomatic relationship with Israel. But how do you look upon the Indian government at the present moment?
So that to do justice to Arafat, I'm not aware of the 1992 experience, so I will not put a stamp of approval to that. But what I want to say is that India has always been a long-standing supporter of Palestine. We are both the products of the same colonization power, and we believe that the Brits should have done more towards India and Palestine, no doubt. But yet there's been a change of government in India under Prime Minister Modi. There's been a shift in support for Israel, and that shift in any way, Prime Minister Modi tried to hold the stick from the middle, as we say in Arabic, trying to please the Palestinians and also push ahead with the commercial treaties and with cooperation with Israel.
Yeah.
But yet India has to play a major role. We are appreciative of the fact that India is suffering from this damn pandemic.
Yeah.
And we believe that had it not been for the pandemic, India would have played a bigger role. We have not seen so far demonstrations in India. I was thinking about it this morning, that a small town in Denmark is coming out to the support of the Palestinians, and India is absent. That London, 100,000 people marched to the central part of London, and there's no Indian sort of demonstration. It is the pandemic. We give you the benefit of the doubt as well, but we would like to see a more engaged India, the India of Rajiv Gandhi and Indira Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi. And this country loves India. I don't want to lecture you on the amount of affection we have for India, but what I want to say that there has been a joint history of incorrectness, of British rule that has taken us places, and we live to see freedom prevail all over the world. Nobody wants to see killing. Nobody wants to see bloodshed.
Sure.
We want to see end to hostility.
So inshallah, you will overcome, and you're absolutely right. The pandemic has just pushed us all indoors. We're all working from home, as you can see. And so therefore, there are not just any demonstrations in favor of the situation in favor of Palestine, but there are no protests anywhere, full stop. And we're all going through a really bad period right now. So wish us well too. But thank you so much, Dr. Saidam, and thank you so much, Jalal Abukhater, for your time and for speaking to ThePrint. Thank you.
Thank you very much.